the reality, James, is that Lydia Thorpe, as one of our senators who we pay 200 and something grand a year for, Lydia Thorpe has far more power over every single Australian than the King or Queen of England does.
And also, she swore allegiance to the Queen when she took her oath of office. So you've got that. But I mean, we had the National Day of Mourning on Thursday. So much disgraceful stuff happening. I mean, I was down at the Sydney protest. There was a big protest down at Town Hall, and you had all sorts of really hideous behaviour. You know, chants of, you know, the effing bitch is dead and all this sort of thing, and really horrible stuff about the Queen. You know, I suspect that this whole sort of idea of good manners that Anthony Albanese talks about in regards to the voice and the Uluru statement is kind of a one-way street. You know, in Marrickville, a street artist had painted a really lovely mural of Queen Elizabeth II. Well, you know, the progressive woke lefties of inner West Sydney decided to cancel her and graffiti and mural that over with an Aboriginal flag, the Aboriginal flag colours, which, of course, you know, very tasteful there. In Brisbane, you had flag burnings of the Australian flag. Now, you can only imagine the national conversation we would have to be having if somebody was to burn an Aboriginal flag. And then, you know, you had a lot of commentary about this all over the place. You know, and I've got to disagree with my friend and colleague Joe Hildebrand on this, who said that, you know, it was actually good that people were able to chant obscenities and burn flags because it shows we have enlightenment and free speech. Well, up to a point, he's right, but I also think that it's a bit disturbing that as a country, we actually haven't had more of a reaction of people coming out and saying, well, that maybe you're right, but what you've done is actually very wrong and very disrespectful, and that people should be outraged about it. And I think that, you know, the fact that more people aren't, I think, is a sign that there is something sort of lacking, I think, in our national spine, that we don't stand up for the values and things that we support and believe in.
I'd go further, James. I read Joe Hildebrand's piece in which he basically said this is a good thing that we have people burning the flag, and it's a good thing that people protest, even if it's fairly tasteless, because this shows that our democracy is functioning well. I think he's completely wrong there. I'm all for free speech. Free speech is absolutely great, but free speech is free speech. It doesn't necessarily have to involve the trashing of symbols of what unites us all. And it's only ever a one-way street. It only ever gets worse and worse. So if you say, yeah, it's fine to burn the flag, yeah, it's fine to trash murals, it's fine to do all this as a way of expressing yourself politically, it does only ever go one way. It just means less and less respect for the symbols that bind us. And you're right. If someone burnt the Aboriginal flag, all hell would break loose. Well, OK, hang on. Ask me why it's legitimate to burn the Australian flag but not legitimate to burn the Aboriginal flag, which I'm not advocating anyone does. Anthony Albanese doesn't even know which right way up the Aboriginal flag goes. He hangs it upside down in half the time. But you have to have respect for the symbols that unite a country. You have to have that respect. And it should not be acceptable. There was a great example of this.
There was a great example of this at the protests I saw on Thursday. So there was a small group of counter-protesters who were standing there with the Australian flag and a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, the departed Her late Majesty. And they were told by New South Wales police to move along and get out of the way from the protesters. Now, of course, you know, because they were essentially implying that they couldn't protect or wouldn't protect these demonstrators or protesters, counter-protesters, who were holding a symbol of the Queen, who they had all sworn an oath to under the Police Act when they all became members of the New South Wales Police Force.
And then it gets that one step further. Once you buy into the Hildebrand argument that trashing or desecrating symbols is legitimate protest, legitimate free speech. Once you go down that route, you then get to the idea that we've seen in the States, Daisy, where you're provocative if you show an Australian flag or an American flag. You're provoking the Antifa rage against you. So symbols become what it's all about, which is not what democracy is about, not what free speech is about.
Well, see, look, I'm going to be very daring and play devil's advocate here, which I know is not necessarily polite, since I'm very aware I am the understudy on this program, very aware. But look, I do think, I hate to say it, that flag burning is a legitimate form form of free speech because you are expressing an opinion very viscerally and physically about the national symbol. That doesn't make it nice. That doesn't mean that it's not obscene or incredibly disrespectful, but people have a right to be obscene and disrespectful if they want. So I have no problem, well, I have a huge problem with the flag burning on principle when you're thinking of free speech. I think it sits well in the realm. The problem is a cultural one, which you two have both touched on. You know, we have got to the point, and it is because the left has such a grip on these cultural institutions. They are so disproportionately represented. They have steered public dialogue to be that it is provocative to display an Australian flag to the point where the cops will not even bother to protect people who are holding the flag and a picture of the Queen. So there is a massive cultural problem here. I do disagree with you. I do think it is a legitimate form of free speech,
Why?
but perhaps because you are expressing an opinion through burning something.
So if I go up to a church, for instance, and burn a crucifix, that's a legitimate form of free speech in your view?
It's a legitimate form of free speech.
I call it vandalism, and
It's
vandalism
both.
is against the law.
But then we get into the conversation about two kind of conflicting laws or rights, and we'd be here all day.
But you know, I think what this comes down to, is the fact that we in Australia have this real problem with doing anything sort of symbolic or ceremonial and managing to create. I mean, we saw the great contrast with the funeral at the start of the week with the memorial in Canberra on Monday. And can I just have a word about that? Because,
yes, please.
I mean, I don't know if you guys watched it, but, you know, that memorial service, guys, was one of the worst things I've ever seen. It was entirely lacking in any ceremony. Now, I have to give Prime Minister Albanese credit. He actually gave a half-decent speech and talked about Queen Elizabeth and her going against fads and, you know, standing for service and duty and all that, which was great. But Governor General David Hurley did not cover himself in glory when he talked about how different people might have different feelings about the Queen. Well, I'm sorry, Governor General, she was the sovereign of all Australians, and you represent her, and that was the point. And the whole ceremony itself, I mean, it felt like a mashup between an episode of Utopia, a really bad school assembly at some joint where the principal worked out how to game their funding and get a really schmick school hall. I mean, the Great Hall looked like it used to have an old scoreboard with home and away up in one corner of it, and a really grim funeral home service where they play My Way at the end, and everyone's invited to the golf club for a drink afterwards. The only thing that was missing was some pimply 17-year-old kid coming out and plinking out Nick Cave's Hallelujah on the piano. Why can we not do ceremony properly in this country?
Very good.